So camera position.
Good.
Guess it'll be a question mark. This microphone give a thumbs up if it's you can hear me okay. Anybody? Thumbs up. Great. Oh, even Adriana. I gave a reflection online, wrote a reflection about how the word retreat comes from the word viveka, which more appropriately means seclusion. And Adriana actually took on both connotations of the word viveka. We use the term retreat in terms of meditation retreat. And when your house is filled with salsa music, you retreat. You actually, you find somewhere else. But she also found a nice secluded spot. So getting to see her there in a park with trees above her. And yeah, it's always inspiring when somebody puts extra effort or that extra touch. Let's look at the lights. And that's what a meditation retreat really is all about. We're not doing anything profoundly different from what we do every time we sit down on the cushion, but we're doing it more often. You know, we're doing it often enough even that we can have some expectation of continuity, some expectation that what we did in the sit at 9 a.m. might still have a resonance in the mind at 3 p.m., that sort of thing. So, has that been the case?
Yeah.
Get a little better?
Mm-hmm. A little bit.
Loosen it up. Say, yeah. And so there are these two things happening there. So samadhi is a lot like the breath. It's going to come and go. But there are currents in the mind. And when we stop doing the things that stir things up, then things really do start to settle, and they'll settle more profoundly. And even as we get much better at samadhi, and through the Q&A and interviews and just talking with people, getting feedback, everybody is actually getting a lot out of it. You know, just the allowance to start at the beginning and to really be clear about what the preliminaries are. Even if that's all that you've done at the end of the retreat, you will have accomplished much because you will actually know what to do every time you sit on the cushion. But there are some, it does go somewhere. So it's kind of a toss-up as a teacher. It's like, it's all nice and tidy if I cover the first, tetrad of the Anapanasati Sutta, quadrad, something like that. The first 4 steps, because that would make sense. But the reality is, everybody who's read the Anapanasati Sutta or heard it talked about had immediately started, each step that was described later on kind of erased what they remembered about the earlier steps. Like, yeah, stay with the breath, stay with the breath. Ooh, what's that about, the whole body? Tranquilizing the body. Piti? Sukha? Liberation? Okay, yeah. Mindfulness of the breath. Yeah. I'm good. Let's get to those later stages. And so do I talk about stage 4 or do I not talk about stage 4? Everyone's getting so much out of the understanding of the well-worn path, of the having like a step-by-step for every time you sit down on a cushion, being allowed to develop samadhi, to not treating meditation as this sort of murky exercise where you're going to try to calm down, and then you're going to try to not react to things. But to say, no, there is something in here deep down that is structured and progressive. This is the definition of Opanayiko, one of the epithets of the Dhamma. Sometimes translated as leading inwards, sometimes translated as leading onwards. And it just means basically step by step. The Dhamma has this natural step-by-step quality if we let it. Fortunately, though, when it comes to the first tetrad, quadrad, whatever it's called, first
They're tetrads.
tetrads? Yeah, but that sounds like three.
I don't know why, but they're definitely tetrads.
Gotcha. Then we'll call them tetrads. The first tetrad, so the first four steps of Anapanasati Sutta, the Buddha is drawing this connection between mindfulness, the seventh path factor, and samadhi, the eighth path factor. He is making the development of them work in tandem. And he is also drawing this connection between what we develop as a meditative practice and the four foundations of mindfulness, which are the basis for liberating insights, the sort of leverage that we use to get under our defilements. It shows us where our defilements are. It shows us where we're not seeing things clearly. Now, the four foundations of mindfulness, the body, feelings, the mind, and mental objects. The Buddha uses that same structure in Anapanasati. So the first tetrad is the body. The second tetrad is Vedana, or feelings. The third tetrad is the basis of the mind. The fourth tetrad is sort of contemplation. It's learning how to see all of the things that arise within that framework, but coming at it from a liberated mind. It's like seeing them as they arise out of peace. So luckily in this first tetrad, which maps to the body, there is somewhat of a nature of these things happening simultaneously. And so people have already been describing, they'll be getting a sense of, the step one, the mindfulness, and they'll already be kind of experimenting with moving their awareness out. Maybe starting here at the nose, but then they find here and there, it's not too hard to get like my whole head. Or they're starting at the chest, like, oh yeah, I do feel my shoulders, huh? And it feels like not a problem. They maybe don't zoom out to the whole body because there's some sense that would be destabilizing. But they see there's these little pockets where they can zoom out and they don't lose that quality of mindfulness and subtlety. And that's okay. That's the fun along the way. That's you actually, working a bit with the third step. That's what it looks like. And Alex was talking about developing mindfulness. And I've been talking about, martial arts training and how it's like anything can be a training. And he started doing his walking meditation on a log. And you can say, oh, that's silly. I said, that's profound. It's brilliant. How many times I've had a long journey and see like a railroad tie, and they're only about like 4 or 5 inches wide. You can only get 1 foot on them, and not completely even. And be very careful. Many times I've just walked for a quarter mile on the railroad tie, just because it really brought me into the moment. Yeah, and it's these little things we do that allow us to own the meditative exercise, to remind ourselves that this is my development of samadhi. This is something that nobody else can do for me. This is going to be for my benefit. Yeah. And so to find ways to enjoy it, to be interested in it, to spice it up. It is not a mechanical exercise because we are not mechanical. We're very complex. There's a lot of things going on. You're going to find different openings to develop these things. There's something to be said for the conventions that we use. And there was a time a few years back where I had been living in monastery for many years, and I just was kind of really realizing how bad I was at samadhi. I mean, just really terribly distracted all the time, and in an adorable kind of way. People really liked that about me. They're like, "Oh, you're so happy-go-lucky," and I'm like, "Well, it's hell." You know, I appreciate that, but it's like I would like to be focused a bit more. And it was weird because when I really stuck with something, I would get very concentrated, but yet it was not continuous. I'd get up from the cushion and it would be gone. I would just be out in the clouds. And so I really started to devote myself to the study of samadhi. I'm like, where did I go wrong? Where did I get lost? Where did I not pick something up? And along the way, I met somebody who was a teacher of NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. And I got exposed to all these different concepts. And I don't honestly remember any of them. So don't quiz me on it or say, is that useful? 'Cause if it was useful, I'd probably still remember some of them. But one thing that did stay with me was an exercise that I had owned myself. I had saw in one of the books and I decided to put to use. And it was this idea that if there's a skill that you want to learn and you don't really know anything about it, you should go and interview a few different masters of that skill and really study the words that they use to describe how they go about doing that skill. And I said, you know, maybe that's what I can do for samadhi practice. Maybe that's what I can do for meditation. I can go every time I meet one of my teachers, I'm going to ask them, hey, when you sit down on the cushion, what do you do? And just like with a notepad, like write down what it is they say. There's no wrong answer. They're going to describe their process in their own words. And then I can go back and I can compare. You know, certainly there must be some similarities there. They're all kind of relaxed and realized and calm and wise. And so what I found is, you know, yeah, they're basically saying the same thing in different words about what they do when they immediately sit down on the cushion. And it was what I've tried to convey a bit through talking about, you know, step 0 and the preliminaries. But one meditation teacher, Ajahn Sucitto, was known for being very bodily oriented. He teaches Qigong in his retreats. And when he walks around leading with his dantian. And it's like his belly is deciding where he goes. And he doesn't walk in straight lines. You know, you would say as samadhi master, he must be very focused. And he's like, no, he just kind of flows. Like you see him go down a sidewalk, he'll be on both sides of the sidewalk 6 or 7 times before he gets to the end of it. It's like, obviously something is working there. But he was able to put it quite succinctly. And when I asked him about the whole process of samadhi, he talked about all sorts of things, like being in a subway car, holding on to one of the straps and just like dangling like a piece of meat on a hook. Yeah. You go to a butcher shop, they'll just put meat on a hook. And he's like, just letting my body dangle, you know, as the car is moving around, and just how relaxing it is, just be a piece of meat. And it's like, okay, that's informative, but that doesn't teach me much about samadhi. That was part of like how he goes about relaxing and getting interested and exploring. So I wasn't dealing with the step-by-step of samadhi. But the thing he said about when he first sits down on a cushion is he said, well, first I come to ground. And I wrote that down. What does that mean? Come to ground. So, I mean, that's how I describe it, he said. I'm like, okay. So that's exactly what I was looking for. That's your technical term for the preliminaries for step 0. You call it coming to ground. Now, got several people logged in. We're all going to have a different way of describing this if we've had an experience of the hindrances going quiet, even for a brief period of time. And it can be really interesting because internally we're going to have our own concept, our own conventions. And it's going to make sense to us. And we can use that to describe other people. And then they start walking on railroad ties and, trying to do walking meditation on logs and hanging from straps, trying to figure out what it is we're describing. Because we've got to each find it for ourselves. And these are the conventions that we use. And they're internal to us. They're how we describe the world, and they're built from perception. So figuring out what is the experience of, the hindrances going quiet, what is the experience of being in the present moment? It's going to mean something to something different to each of us. But we know along the way that that's where we've got to start. And however, whatever path we're taking to get there, we want to really get to know that path once we've found it. We want to name that path. We want to head in that direction every time we sit down, because that will lead us to good places. And I've even got my own way of thinking about it, like I described, of suddenly walking into an empty room. I was talking with Adriana, and it's sort of like you're at a party in a house with many rooms. And you know that the room you're in is a little loud, but you just kind of adjust to it. But at some point you walk into a side room and nobody's in there and the sounds are muffled, and you realize, oh, it's actually quiet in here, and that allows me to see how noisy that was over there. And it can be that way with the mind. Getting past the hindrances is realizing that there's all these voices and forces pulling one. And then suddenly they find themselves in this room where those voices are just they're murmurs, really. And you just kind of push them to the side. Like, oh, okay, wait, it's quiet here. Why don't I hang out here? And when I start there, when I get there, curiously, the idea of doing mindfulness doesn't really have any purchase. Like, I'm able to direct the mind, but it doesn't feel like I'm forcing my mind to do something. It's more like I'm kind of like, hey, mind, why don't you pay attention to the breath? And sometimes it does, and sometimes it goes wandering, like, hey, why don't we come back? And it kind of does. It's not like dragging it back or scrunching a muscle. It's more like I realize I can kind of ask it to do that, because it's not something outside of myself. It is me. I can just decide, and now we're going to pay attention to this. And sometimes I'm more successful than others, but sometimes there gets to be momentum and continuity where I don't have to try at all. And I just realize that the mind is staying aware of this thing all the time. And so when we're on retreat, we get these experiences where we're actually gaining some momentum. And one of the directions we'll start to head in is towards the fourth step. And the fourth step is actually, there are parts of this that are useful all along the way. But to understand why, we have to understand our conventions, and then we can understand what is beyond them. So in the fourth step, the Buddha says, they train thus. I will breathe in, tranquilizing the bodily formation. And they train thus. I will breathe out, tranquilizing the bodily formation. And so this is like neurolinguistics. This is a code word, sort of like come to ground. What the heck is the bodily sankhara? The bodily formation, what is that? The Buddha is describing something that the vast majority of people will never be able to understand, simply because they have never seen outside of it. It's like the simile of, frog talking to the fish about water. The fish has no idea what the frog is talking about. Water. What do you mean, water? I don't see any water. She's just like, the fish has never been outside of water. For him, this is just the way the world is. But the frog has been out in air and he's looked down and he's seen that water's down there. There are things other than water. And likewise, there will be times in our breath meditation when we will notice there is something we are doing. And it's something which is not harmful in and of itself. And it's that we are describing for ourselves a body. And the way it works is sort of like this. I have a sensation down here. And I say, that's my knee. Specifically, that's my knee joint, which gets swollen from time to time. It's from the Lyme I had way back when, and the lymphatics never really recovered. And especially when I'm doing lots of meditation. And that's my sankhara. It's my construction, a sensation, and then a turning of the mind to that sensation is a knee. And the knee means this. The sensation's bad because it reflects on something painful that happened. And all of these things are glued together, and that glue is what we call sankharas. They are formations. They are formed of multiple individual things that are invisibly connected in the mind. So the body sankhara is not just one thing, but it is all of the one things are connected together. So when we have the idea of our head, it might be interesting to consider that every time we have the idea of our head, it's a slightly different idea. We bang here and we're like, okay, yeah, that's my head. But then we do this and we're like, okay, yeah, that's my head. Those are different concepts. But somewhere deep down, there's a definition of head that we're using. And now this is a little theoretical. And this is why we get here at the end, after having cultivated, strong mindfulness, before we really start probing into this. Because these explorations, they're like, well, how do you have a head without thinking head? Like, what is a sensation without a label? What would it be like to not think about the body, but to just body? And can you even do that? Can you body as a verb? But this will be something we get little glimpses of in meditation along the way. And part of the reason why relinquishing this, even though it's useful all along the way, because when we try to describe for ourselves something, when we bring along other ideas, we're missing the point. So right from the beginning, we're going to be trying to describe for ourselves the breath. And we're going to be saying it's this flowing energy up here. But in doing that, we're ignoring all of the air and movement down here. And we're ignoring all of the moving energy through the body down here. So our concepts limit us, but why would they be useful? Why would we allow these things to incompletely describe what we're experiencing? Don't we want to get past them? And it's part of it is just coming back to, are we ready to dispense with them? So a convention, like knowing when I sit down, the first thing I got to do is come to ground. That's describing something and it's packaging something, but that's actually a very useful convention. It gives you an idea of something that you do, something that you look for, such that when you find that, when you arrive at that point, you don't need that concept anymore. You can set it aside. And we're doing this along the way in breath meditation. We're using these structures, these concepts, like the breath coming in and the breath going out. We're using these concepts like locating our mindfulness. We're using these concepts like the difference between subtle and coarse sensations. We're actually applying these conventions to help us along the way. And they're useful. And even the convention of bringing mindfulness to the whole body is just, ultimately, there's an idea in there. And as we're becoming more mindful of the body, we're going to be stumbling on our conventions. We're like, oh, those feelings are the shoulders. No, wait, that's the collarbones. No, it's the shoulders. Now, actually, I don't know what that is. Is that just my shirt pulling on my skin? I don't know. Well, the idea of, expanding mindfulness to the body will have these starts and stops. We realize we're going to come in contact with something we were ignoring for a reason. And it's like, oh, that doesn't feel so good. But if our mindfulness is strong and our mindfulness is subtle, then that will be okay. And this is why the third step is a training. And the fourth step is also a training. So we're going to be learning along the way. We're going to be learning about this aspect of training. I'm wondering, has the feed stopped? Do I see thumbs up? Great. Okay. I think it might have hiccuped there. So what we're training in is we're training to notice these conventions at first, but it's sort of like in step one, where we're having coarse sensations in our body, but we're just letting the breath kind of wash over them, go back and forth over them, not resisting, just letting it happen. We're not even looking for them, but we're okay with them being there. The same way, up until stage 4, we're okay with these concepts. We're like, yeah, okay, breath is just an idea. Yeah. Knees are just an idea. Location of the breath is just an idea. And that's funny because that's an idea we let go of pretty quickly. We start located and then we just kind of like expand anyway. We zoom out.
Did Bante stop talking for anybody else, or is it just me?
Lost you for a second, Bante. You still there?
Yeah, I'm watching the screen. So
Okay.
it's also very kind to the computer to wait until this point of the retreat to decide to give us all sorts of problems. But it's okay. I'm also talking about heady concepts right here. And so little pauses and reflections are okay. Now, what will happen as we reach the extent of the body is we will want to continue to develop our mindfulness. We'll kind of find ourselves aware of pretty much everything that's going on, all the sensations we're feeling everywhere, subtle and coarse. And our mindfulness will, if we got to this stage sequentially, will maintain its strength. And we'll be feeling pretty good. I gotta say, you won't be like ecstatic bliss, but there's a certain joy to this. The moment we realize that I'm able to feel my nose and my toes simultaneously, we actually feel like we've accomplished something, simply because that has not been our default. It's a kind of surprise along the way. Then we're like, that's actually, I really want to do that more. Actually, I think I've been trying to do that more. and I just didn't know how to get here. I was trying to get right here, and getting lost along the way, because it has to be sequential. But nevertheless, once we reach the outline of the body, once we start filling the body with mindfulness, that's when we're really going to be grappling with these kaya sankharas, or the kaya sankhara. The idea of a body will start to become a hindrance to us, because it is just an idea. It is an idea arising after the experience. And therefore, it is not the experience itself. Because it is not the experience itself, that gives us a hint of where we can look next for deepening our experience and deepening our samadhi. Once we are capable of maintaining mindfulness while feeling things throughout the body, then we start catching ourselves even describing the body and seeing the gaps in that. Now, along the way, we're going to have seen these gaps, and it is useful at any time to kind of set aside these ideas, these conventions of the body. But sometimes they're just useful for a time, and they go away on their own. So we don't need to think about it. But at this fourth stage, we're going to very intentionally start seeing through them and poking holes in them and asking, is that really what's going on? Because we are looking for a particular experience. And it's an experience where all of our different ideas of body, the head bone's connected to the shoulder bone, connected to the pelvis bone, connected to the foot bone, all of that is connected. Ultimately, there is a single idea there of body, and that's sankhara. It's a web. And if we can undercut that, and we can tranquilize all of the thoughts kind of at once, and also, again, utilizing the idea of our conventions and describing something, I would say this is sort of like if we've been going through the entire meditative exercise, the entire time looking down at a map. And saying, okay, this is what I'm looking at. I'm looking at the breath here, or I'm looking at the knee here. And tranquilizing the body formation is something like looking up from the map. And suddenly we don't need the map. We're just confident that things are there, and we just go. And for me, that's what this feels like and seems like. Like suddenly having been like looking into the body and forming ideas about it, and suddenly looking up and just being. And that is a very different experience, a very interesting experience, a very powerful experience. And so we are having a lot of glitching, I'm seeing on the screen. And I'm therefore not totally sure if this is coming through.
You're good, Bhante. We've heard everything.
You've heard everything. Okay.
Yep, you're good. We just killed videos to save you some bandwidth.
That's very kind. To see it takes a team. So it's something to consider, and a parting word to leave with in terms of this part of the training and the development of samadhi is to appreciate these moments when you see through the kaya sankhara, to appreciate the moments when you actually do lift your head up and you're just like, whoa, this is what it's like to just be, to not be somebody thinking about being, but to actually just be. But to not get attached to those moments in the early practice, to not seek those moments in early practice. It feels so much more like an accomplishment, and it can be the basis of profound insight. But it's best to get there with our mindfulness intact, because a lot of the early development of mindfulness starts with the conventions holding us in place, keeping us on task. And it's only once they're not needed anymore that we want to set them aside completely. And also because, and this might seem odd as a warning, piti and sukha start to arise once we set the kaya sankhara aside. And it's like, why would that be a warning? I'm okay. I can yes, yeah, no, I think I'd like that. Maybe I should experiment more with that. I say it as kind of a warning because these can be very destabilizing for the mind. Part of the reason we don't experience ecstasy and deep bliss, emotional bliss in daily life is because we become pretty distracted by it, to say the least. It really grabs our minds in an incredible way. We were talking during the Q&A about vitaka and vichara, the ability to consciously direct our mind, which is often hidden from us. And now for some people, just reclaiming that fills them with all sorts of energy and enthusiasm. You're like, this is amazing. I can think about whatever I want when I want to. But all the more so when piti and sukha start to arise. And so if we've, and there's many teachers who are capable of getting somebody past their ideas of the body, straight to the piti and sukha, and using that even as a stepping board for like jhana meditation. And I'm putting my hand out here because that is kind of out there. And if we rush to out there, we might miss something that's a bit more useful in the short term, which is something that many of you have discovered even on this retreat. The simple kind of pat on the back, this is working, of developing step 0, developing the preliminaries, of working with step 1 until step 2 starts to make sense. And it's like, that's not something to toss aside. Once you realize that that gives you conventions that you can use to describe for yourself every step along the way. And then when you get to step 4, when you've got strong, clear, continuous mindfulness in the entire body, then you can be like, okay. And you can raise your head and you can step off into the next tetrad, into the next set of instructions, knowing that what comes up is going to be something that you can face, that you're going to have the mindfulness and the clarity to face. And maybe that'll be the subject of a future retreat. Coming attraction. Maybe that'll be the subject of a future meditation experience for yourself. And maybe it's something you'll have a taste of along the way. And I encourage you, if you're still developing the early stages, to just put it in your back pocket and hang on to it. Be like, that's a sign of things to come. I can't wait till I can get there and be fully ready for it. And you don't have to worry, because if you're really understanding each of these steps for what they are, then you're not gonna languish or linger in any one of them too long. It'll move on. It's opanayiko. It actually draws you onward, provided that you're understanding each in its right aspects. All right, so I apologize for the technical difficulties. I hope this has kind of been able to convey enough, at least. And we have not yet reached the end of the retreat, so our bellies have kind of done their work, digesting lunch, and now the afternoons is going to be a little easier practice. We've got another a bit over an hour left. So I'd say we take maybe another half hour for walking meditation, and then we come back and finish out our time together, the retreat, with a 45-minute sitting. Okay, so we'll see you in about 4:15. And so that was a pretty good weekend. What is our standard? What is our definition of a good weekend? Buddhism likes to flip around common conceptions. It wasn't what we did necessarily, where we went. Most basic level, we have absolutely nothing to regret. And then we have a lot to be quite proud of. And that's enduring. The samadhi we've attained might fall away as soon as we get back and check our phone. But if we've applied ourselves, we've understood things, we've learned things, and that stays with us. Especially if we were willing to do the hardest part of samadhi, which is to admit that we're not going to ace it the first time we sit down and we just skip all the preliminary steps, but to say, actually, I want to get good at those. I want to get good at those. So every time I sit down, I know exactly what I'm going to do first, and then what I'm going to do, and then what I'm going to do. And I have a sense that this is an upanayiko dhamma. This is something that will lead progressively onward and get better and better. So samadhi is, ultimately, it's an individual pursuit. Another epithet of the Dhamma, pachatam veditavo vinyuhi, for each wise person to understand for themselves. And that's what's been offered, just some guidelines to help you figure it out for yourself. But Buddhist practice is not solitary. It is interconnected through and through. It begins with friends supporting you and pointing you in the right direction. And even after you have reached the culmination of the Buddhist path, you will be supported and surrounded by those who value Dhamma, value what's good, what's wholesome, what's pleasant, what's true. And so this retreat couldn't have come together without many, many people, but especially Master of Ceremonies, Alex, also Upavana board member, and crucial force for Upavana getting off the ground, to Donna, Sandy, and Isa, who were away and let us borrow their beautiful space here. Their living room pretty much looks like this. We just pushed things to the outside. It was already here at the edge of the forest and beautiful and ready for this. For our neighbors who hopefully didn't notice us too much taking up the bandwidth, which we didn't realize until towards the end of the retreat, is actually asking for them to be part of the retreat as well. And allowing us to stream on the connection. To Luciana, her mother, her father, Andrew, her boyfriend, all of whom helped, fed everyone multiple times, completely unexpectedly, but joyously, and who was actually able to participate in much of the retreat. And last but not least, everybody online. Andrew, Adriana, Deos, I see you there. Reed joining in. Christine, you were just the people that we could see in the Zoom window, to say nothing of those who tuned in through YouTube and who will continue to tune in because all of this will be available online. Am I forgetting anything?
No. What's next?
What's next? So this retreat was, Upavana is an organization based on supporting Buddhist practice and supporting the people who do it. So that is an open-ended question. How is that done? It is a nonprofit registered in Massachusetts. And this is, in terms of physical locality, this is where our physical stuff will be. But wherever there are people who value the good Dhamma, we can extend our influence. So what's next is up to the good people and where can Upavana support people. So if you would be interested in future offerings, reach out, upavana.org, UPAVANA. If you would like to support the venture, this is all offered for free, but it's possible to donate. And as we do more activities, we do our best to find a way to be locally supported, but there's always little costs. So by donating, offering something, be it physical requisites or money, that goes towards future offerings. You can tune in, connect with the schedule multiple times a week. There are things going on, and that's listed on the website. And if we get suggestions and support for future retreats, we'll offer those. There is some interest in doing an online retreat next month. So we'll see. I pretty much always game.
Next month, my whole apartment will be open, passion will be gone, so we can do it from there.
Okay, so we may have what we need to see that come to be. So stay tuned, and if you have any suggestions for a theme, we would especially appreciate anybody who might have the time to be a volunteer and coordinate the online aspect of that. So I'm really dumb when it comes to online stuff. If you saw my rig, you would see somebody who obviously doesn't understand what USBs are all about, because I have to like do all sorts of things with them to get it all to work. So anybody who would like to offer their services in the online realm would really love an online coordinator to help make the good stuff happen. And I don't think I've covered all the bases. In terms of Samadhi, we are here, and you are there, and we will continue to meet each other. So we've established a common dialogue around these themes. So we'll be able to help support each other going into the future. And to me, that's the most important thing to support. Yeah, that opportunity to keep growing together. So that sounds like a really great way to wrap things up. Okay?
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Bond.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much to Bante and everybody who helped make this happen. People in person, organize technology and the food. And thank you everyone for enduring the dukkha with me. It made it so much more fun doing this with friends. So thank you. And thank you so much, Bante, for taking the time to do this.
My joy.
Thank you, Bante, and everybody.
Thank you. And what is today? Sunday. So see many of you on Wednesday for the virtual tea time. We can discuss along the way, reflections, how it went, thoughts for the future. I openly invite emails about how this went and how it might go better. So it's a learning experience. Until next time.
Thank you so much again. Bye, everyone.
The end meeting, Phil?